November 4th, 1942, 17:20 hours. Coastal road west of El Alamein, Egypt. The desert is moving. Not the dunes, the road. A thin gray ribbon of tarmac cuts through the fading light, and on it, from horizon to horizon, crawls a wounded animal made of steel and dust. Trucks, staff cars, half-tracks, fuel bowsers with bullet-scarred sides. Their engines grind in low gear, coughing black smoke into the evening sky. The air smells of burned oil, hot metal, and something else you can almost taste: defeat. In the middle of this column, in a dusty Opel staff car, General Feldmarschall Erwin Rommel sits hunched forward, elbows on his knees, binoculars dangling against a sweat-stained tunic. The desert fox is watching his army run. The wind claws at the canvas roof. Sand whips past in thin, stinging sheets, rattling against the windshield like 1,000 tiny stones. The driver squints into the haze, one gloved hand tight on the wheel, as another gaggle of overloaded trucks suddenly jerks into view, swerving to avoid a crater that wasn't there yesterday. On the flatbed of one truck, a Panzer III turret is lashed down with fraying rope, its gun barrel pointing uselessly at the sky. On another, wounded men lie pressed shoulder to shoulder, greatcoats pulled over pale faces, boots dangling off the back. A field dressing, soaked dark through, flaps loose from a bandaged leg. You can hear the low murmur of voices as the staff car passes. No singing, no jokes, just the dull roar of engines and the occasional cough of a man who's been breathing dust for 2 years. Rommel lifts his field glasses. Behind them, to the east, the desert is on fire. Orange fingers of flame lick at the last of the armored hulks left along the Alamein line. The wrecks of Panzers and British Grants glow like coals on a vast, dark stove. Above them, the sky is streaked with black fingers of smoke climbing into the evening, pointing like accusing hands back toward the front they have abandoned. Behind those fires, somewhere in that gray-brown haze, are the men of the 8th Army, Bernard Montgomery's tanks and trucks, spreading out across the desert like a flood breaking through a dam that has finally burst. Rommel lowers the glasses, and for a moment says nothing. Inside the car, his chief of staff, General Fritz Bayerlein, is hunched over a clipboard, pencil trembling with each bump of the road. "Fuel situation?" Rommel asks quietly, his voice almost lost beneath the grinding of the engine. Bayerlein doesn't look up. He has already done this calculation 3 times today. "For the mobile elements, if we are lucky, Herr Feldmarschall, perhaps enough to reach the line at Fuka. After that," he lets the sentence die in the air. Outside, a Kubelwagen rattles past in the opposite direction, racing east with a single motorcycle escort. No markings, no flags, just a sheet of dust and the flash of a white bandage on the driver's hand. Couriers, Rommel thinks. Someone still believes the front can be saved. He knows better. On the seat beside him, a folded message crinkles every time the staff car hits a rut. It is from Hitler, sent that morning through the Luftwaffe liaison officer in a neat, impersonal hand. "Stand fast at El Alamein. No further retreat authorized." Rommel had read it in silence, then turned it over as if the back might contain something more useful. Now it lies there, heavy as a stone, its black letters burning through the paper. Outside, the retreating army rolls on. A column of Italian M13 tanks clatters by on worn tracks, their crews riding on the hulls, dust-caked faces turned toward the setting sun. One man raises a hand in a half-hearted salute as Rommel's car passes. His eyes are not those of a man retreating to a prepared line. They are the eyes of a man who has seen this road before. but always heading the other way. A year ago, Rommel drove this same stretch of desert with his head out of the hatch, wind in his face, pointing west, always west. Tobruk, Gazala, Marche, each town another prize pulled out of the dust by an army that seemed to live on bravado and gasoline fumes. Now the names come back in reverse, like some cruel film being rewound. Marche, Sidi Barrani, the frontier wire. Then, if they even make it that far, Libya. Rommel closes his eyes for a moment, and you can almost hear the desert as it was in 1941. The thunder of engines, the crack of 88s, the exultant shout when another British tank brews up under a perfect shot. Clear skies, long lines of dust on the horizon, marking the path of the hunt. Back then, it felt as if the desert itself favored him. Endless maneuver space, open flanks, the perfect battlefield for a man who thought in sweeps and thrusts rather than in neat staff diagrams. He opens his eyes again. Now the desert feels small, narrow, trapped between the sea and the Katara Depression. The great armored chessboard has become a corridor, a killing lane, and today, his pieces are the ones being knocked off the board. The car lurches as it crests a low rise. For the first time, Rommel can see the column not just around him, but stretching forward, bending with the curve of the earth. Trucks packed with jerry cans, ambulances with the Red Cross barely visible beneath the dust, a handful of precious panzers, their turrets turned rearward, guns ready, guarding the only thing that now matters, movement. It goes on and on, kilometers of it, an army reduced to a single action, retreat. "Look at that," Bayerlein mutters, almost to himself. "If the Tommies have the fuel to swing around and cut this road." Rommel doesn't answer. He is thinking of fuel as well, not British fuel. He thinks of the convoys that never arrived, of Italian merchantmen sunk in the Mediterranean before they even saw the African coast, of tankers burning in the night, their fiery columns visible from the shoreline like floating funeral pyres. He thinks of reports. 2 ships reached Tobruk, 3 sunk off Benghazi, 1 turned back to Toronto. He thinks of his own messages to Berlin, coded and urgent, each repeating the same plea in different words. Send fuel, send trucks, send anything that moves on wheels. Weeks of silence, then a few dribbling responses, a handful of replacements, some half-trained crews, a promise that after Stalingrad, more resources will come. Stalingrad, another name, another front, another drain. The car slows as the column compresses. Up ahead, a traffic knot glows in the dust, brake lights winking red through the haze. A motorcycle dispatch rider, goggles opaque with sand, weaving frantically between vehicles, shouting hoarse warnings as someone tries to turn a 3-ton truck in a road barely wide enough to take it. Rommel's driver leans on the horn, short, angry blasts. The sound is swallowed by engines and the impatient orders shouted in German and Italian. A Stuka flies overhead, low and slow, its siren mercifully silent for once. It banks west, the black crosses on its wings dull in the last light. No bombs, no screaming dive, just the lonely silhouette of an aircraft that once symbolized terror, now reduced to reconnaissance, watching its own side fall back. "Where are the fighters?" someone mutters from a nearby truck. No one answers. The staff car edges forward again, inch by inch, as the traffic knot untangles. Rommel glances to the right, toward the south, where the desert stretches empty and flat into the interior. Once, that emptiness meant opportunity. Now, it means something far simpler. There is nowhere left to maneuver. "Herr Feldmarschall," Bayerlein says quietly, folding his clipboard, "we can still stabilize a line at Fuka if we get the supply columns clear, if we are allowed to fall back in good order. Rommel hears the unspoken second part of that sentence, if we are allowed. He thinks of Hitler again, of the radio message waiting to be acknowledged, of the words, "no further retreat," echoing in his head like the crack of a judge's gavel. Outside, the retreating army crawls on, its future tied to the barrels it is burning with every kilometer. Rommel looks back over his shoulder. The glow on the eastern horizon is brighter now, not just the wrecks, something else, the flicker of artillery, the distant thump of heavy guns, their vibrations just barely reaching the soles of his boots through the steel floor of the car. The British are coming, fast. He turns forward again, watching the trucks grind toward the west, toward Fuka. Night falls quickly in the desert. By 1900 hours, the sky above the retreat is a bowl of black velvet, pricked with cold, clean stars. The heat drains away, leaving behind a biting chill that creeps through greatcoats and settles in the bones of exhausted men. The column has stopped, for now. Engines tick and ping as they cool, stretching shadows across the hard-packed ground. Somewhere out in the darkness, a mechanic curses in Italian as he wrestles with a jammed fuel pump. A lantern glows under the belly of a truck, casting a circle of yellow light on a pair of boots and an oil-streaked hand. Rommel stands alone a short distance from his staff car, boots crunching softly on the gravel. He walks away from the bobbing lanterns and murmur of voices, out into a patch of darkness where the desert feels like an empty sea. Above, the Milky Way spills across the sky in a ghostly river. Below, the headlights of hundreds of vehicles have been dimmed or covered, replaced by slits of dull red or muted blue. The army has become a city at blackout, stretched in a single crooked line from horizon to horizon. You can almost feel the quiet tension. Men hunched over mugs of ersatz coffee. Others curled in their blankets beneath trucks, sleeping with rifles pressed to their chests. A few, faces drawn and hollow, simply stare east, toward where they know the British guns are still rumbling. Rommel lifts his binoculars again. There is almost nothing to see. Just the faintest pulse of light far away, tiny orange sparks winking on and off along the horizon. Each flash is a shell leaving a gun barrel or a distant explosion. The sound arrives seconds later, a dull, rolling thud that feels more like a memory than a noise. He lowers the glasses and glances back toward the column. Near his car, a portable radio set hums quietly on a folding table, its aerial a black line against the stars. A signalman in headphones leans in, listening, one hand pressing the earpiece tight against his head. As Rommel approaches, Bayerlein steps forward, a slip of paper already in his hand. He doesn't need to say where it's from. The heading, the code group, the weight of the words are all too familiar. Berlin, High Command, the Führer. Rommel takes the message. The paper is thin, almost translucent between his fingers. The letters, transcribed by the signalman from the crackling ether of the airwaves, are sharp and uncompromising. Afrika Korps and Italian forces will hold present positions. Further retreat strictly forbidden. Every meter of African soil must be defended to the last man and last cartridge. Convey to troops that backward movement is no longer possible. Unity of will is decisive. It is not the first such order he has received. But tonight, reading it here, with the road to the west choked by exhausted machines and empty fuel cans, the words feel different. Unity of will, he murmurs, almost to himself. The phrase hangs in the cold air like a challenge. Behind him, a gust of wind sweeps across the open ground, lifting a whisper of sand. It rasps against boots and fabric, moving on, always westward, as if even the desert itself is retreating. Bayerlein clears his throat softly.
Herr Feldmarschall, there is more. Rommel turns the page. You can see his jaw tighten as he reads the final lines. You will inform the troops that the eyes of the Führer are upon them. German soldiers do not retreat. They achieve victory or fall. Rommel folds the paper once, carefully, precisely. When he speaks, his voice is level. Berlin still thinks this is 1941, he says. Bayerlein says nothing. The only sound is the low murmur of the radio and the distant throb of an idling engine. Rommel looks past his chief of staff toward the line of vehicles. He sees silhouettes moving, officers conferring over maps, drivers checking wheels and jerry cans, a medic adjusting the blanket over a wounded man's shoulders. These are not the men of a fresh, victorious army surging across the frontier. They are tired, hollow-eyed, dust-caked. Some have been in the desert since the first day Rommel arrived in Tripoli, nearly 2 years before. Back then, he was the new man, the bold commander sent to rescue a failing Italian ally, the one who took a handful of divisions and through speed and audacity hurled the British back over hundreds of kilometers. He remembers his first drive along the Libyan coast, the crowds in Tripoli cheering, the white uniform of the Italian governor, the smell of the sea, sharp and clean, breaking over the breakwaters while he inspected his newly arrived panzers. He remembers the feeling in his chest then, the certainty that with skill and momentum you could bend events to your will. He looks down at the message in his hand, and for the first time he recognizes that sentiment in someone else. Hitler still believes that will alone can hold a line without fuel, without ammunition, without trucks. Rommel knows better. Herr Feldmarschall, your reply? Rommel lifts his eyes to the sky, as if the right words might be written somewhere between the stars. How do you tell a man who believes himself infallible that geography and gasoline do not care about his titles, that the desert is not impressed by rhetoric? You will signal, Rommel says slowly, that we will do everything in our power to stabilize the situation, that I will take all necessary measures to preserve the fighting strength of the Afrika Korps. Bayerlein hesitates. All necessary measures, he repeats. In that pause, you can hear the weight of what is unsaid, because to Rommel, necessary measures means something very simple. He will continue to retreat. He will ignore the order to stand and die. He will try to save what can be saved. But that defiance, quiet, almost invisible between the lines of a radio message, comes with a price. Not just the risk of dismissal or disgrace, or worse. It comes with an acknowledgement that cuts deeper than any reprimand from Berlin. He, Erwin Rommel, the man the British press once called the Desert Fox with grudging admiration, can no longer win this campaign by brilliance alone. The situation is beyond tactics. He hands the folded message back to Bayerlein. Burn that when we are finished, he says. I will not have Hitler's orders passed from mouth to mouth among men who already know too well what we face. Bayerlein nods, tucking the paper into his map case as if it were something poisonous. A gust of laughter drifts from a nearby truck, brief, brittle, and quickly stifled. A soldier has said something to lighten the mood, and for a moment the old camaraderie flickers. Then someone coughs violently, the sound tearing at their throat. The laughter dies. Rommel turns away, pacing a few steps into the darkness. Out here, away from the vehicles, the night feels immense. The stars press down like a million cold eyes. The ground is nothing but shadow and stone. He remembers the maps spread out in his field headquarters a week ago, the colored pins, the carefully drawn arrows. His own voice, firm, pointing to potential fallback lines, to positions where fuel and ammunition might still be concentrated. He remembers the faces of his officers, some hopeful, some grim. They trusted that he would find a way through, as he always had. Now he imagines a different map, not of North Africa, but of the entire war. To the north, Russia, Stalingrad, the Volga, the endless plains swallowing panzer divisions whole. To the west, the Atlantic, where Churchill boasts of growing strength and American convoys bring not just supplies, but a new kind of war, industrial, relentless, measured not in divisions, but in factories. In the middle, Germany, stretched thin, fighting on too many fronts, drawing on reserves of men and material that no longer exist in the quantities demanded. And here, at the bottom of that map, like a dangling limb, is Africa. Laid out on the sand, Rommel can see it clearly now. They are not the vital spearhead of a grand strategy. They are an appendage, useful once, dangerous to lose, but ultimately dispensable when the body is under attack everywhere at once. The thought stings. He has bled for this desert. His men have died for it. Italian units, mocked and scorned in Berlin, have stood and been shattered alongside his own regiments. Graves dot the sand from Salum to Agalea. And yet, in the cold arithmetic of war, Africa is becoming a luxury Germany cannot afford. He breathes in, the air freezing his lungs, and forces that thought down. He cannot indulge in strategic despair, not in front of his men, not while they still look.
By 0610 AR, the sun has fully cleared the horizon, a white-hot disk hanging low over the eastern sky. The early gold has burned away, replaced by a harsh, unforgiving light that sharpens every edge and flattens every color into shades of tan and khaki. Rommel stands on the ridge like a statue cut from sand and shadow. Below him, the world moves. The coastal road is no longer just a road, it is a conveyor belt of war. Convoy after convoy grinds west, the sound a continuous rolling thunder, engines, treads, gears, and the occasional squeal of brakes as the column flexes and tightens around bends. Dust hangs over the entire scene like a low, shifting ceiling, lit from within by the glint of metal and the gleam of glass. Through his Zeiss binoculars, Rommel can see everything in cruel detail. An American M4 Sherman lumbers past, its suspension rising and falling smoothly over the rough patches, hull numbers stenciled neatly in white. On its turret, a crewman in a steel helmet lounges behind a .50 caliber machine gun, one hand on the grips, the other holding a cigarette. He looks relaxed. Too relaxed, Rommel thinks, for a man driving toward an enemy army. Behind the Sherman rolls a British Crusader tank, older, more angular, its armor pitted and burned in places, repair patches visible along the hull. A veteran. Next comes a Valentine infantry tank, then another Sherman, then a hulking Grant with its strange side-mounted gun. Old and new, British and American, scars and factory-fresh paint, all blended into one inexhaustible wave. Byerland stands at Rommel's shoulder, his own glasses fixed on the flow. Mixed formations, he notes quietly. They're learning to combine their equipment properly now, no longer just separate British and American units thrown together. Rommel says nothing. He watches as the tanks give way to something else. Artillery. Sextons and priests, self-propelled guns with tall, boxy superstructures trundle along, their long barrels pointing skyward like accusing fingers. Towed 25-pounders bump behind trucks, their crews riding on the trails, boots drumming against the metal. Ammunition lorries follow in tight formation, canvas covers bulging over stacked crates of shells. A single 25-pounder battery, Rommel knows this, can fire hundreds of rounds in a single engagement. Here he can see dozens of batteries strung along the road, all fed by their private fleets of ammunition trucks. "Count the guns," he murmurs. Byerland obeys. In that group alone, 12 self-propelled, perhaps 16 towed, and that's just one slice of the convoy.
For every gun, Rommel thinks, there are shells. For every shell, there is a factory. For every factory, there is a river of coal and steel and labor. He shifts his view. Now he sees fuel. Tankers rumble forward, their cylindrical bodies glinting dully under coats of dust. Some bear British markings, others American. Numbers stenciled on the sides indicate capacity: 2,000 liters, 5,000, 8,000. He can almost hear the liquid inside sloshing with each bump in the road. One direct hit, he knows, and a tanker will go up in a roar of fire. But for every tanker destroyed, a dozen more will follow. They are not husbanding these vehicles like precious relics. They are using them, spending them because they can. Behind the tankers come the repair units. Mobile workshops roll by on heavy truck chassis, doors open to reveal lathes, drill presses, racks of spare parts secured with straps. Mechanics in rolled-up sleeves sit on running boards, mugs in hand, looking mildly bored. Bored. Rommel's jaw tightens. His own mechanics have worked until their hands bled, cannibalizing one wreck to keep another machine running. They've smelted scrap armor plates over open fires, forged makeshift parts from whatever they could find. For them, every functioning vehicle is a small miracle. Here, repairs are routine, organized, a matter of course, not survival. A jeep darts past a column of slower trucks, weaving in and out with easy confidence. Its windshield is folded down. Two officers sit in the front, maps fluttering on their knees. On the hood, painted in neat white letters, is a single word: supply. Rommel lowers the glasses, exhaling slowly through his nose. In his mind, something clicks into place, a lesson he has spent 2 years resisting, drowned out by his own successes and the myths that have grown around him. He has always believed, deep down, that the right maneuver, the right daring stroke could overturn any material disadvantage, that a bold thrust through the enemy flank, a surprise night march, an 88 gun positioned in just the right wadi could turn scarcity into victory. Here, on this ridge, he is forced to watch the opposite truth. When the disparity in material becomes great enough, even genius is reduced to damage control. He raises the binoculars again. Now he sees the infantry. Open trucks, their wooden sides scarred and dusty, are packed with men in khaki and olive drab. Helmets bob with every jolt. Some men doze, heads resting against rifles. Others smoke and talk. A few sing under their breath, the words lost in the engine roar. They do not look like men at the end of a long, desperate pursuit. They look fresh. New boots, new webbing, clean rifles. Some of them, Rommel realizes, probably have never seen combat. They are being driven toward their first battle in the certainty that they will have food, ammunition, and medical care when they get there. In his binoculars, he can read their faces. Not bravado, not fanaticism, something quieter, confidence. The confidence of soldiers who know that behind them is not a desperate chain of depots hanging on a thin sea route, but an entire industrial world. A dust devil dances across the plain between the ridge and the road, a twisting column of sand that spins itself out and disappears. The convoy does not notice. It simply flows around the minor obstacle, inexorable. Beside Rommel, Byerland clears his throat. Herr Field Marshal, our reconnaissance estimates indicate that what we see here is only the forward elements. There are reports from the air of additional convoys forming near Alexandria and Cairo, trains unloading more vehicles every day. Rommel nods. He has already realized as much. This is not the British scraping together the last reserves of an empire. This is the opening tap of a reservoir that has barely been turned on. He thinks of America. A country with no bombed-out cities, no burning oil fields, no starving civilians huddled in ruined basements. A continent-sized factory churning out tanks and trucks and planes, while German industry strains under the weight of multiple wars and endless bombing raids. A gust of wind slaps at his greatcoat. He tastes dust on his tongue. He lowers the glasses and closes his eyes for a brief moment. Images flash behind his lids. His panzers swinging around the British flank at Gazala, dust plumes trailing behind them like victory banners. Columns of prisoners marching east, heads down, guarded by grinning German infantry. A triumphant entry into Benghazi, crowds lining the streets, Italian officers saluting as if he were a savior. He opens his eyes again. Below him, trucks, tanks, guns. But this time, they are not his. "Fritz," he says quietly, "do you remember what I told the men in 41 when we first arrived?" Byerland thinks for a moment. "You said that with speed and surprise we could compensate for numbers, that if we always moved faster than the British thought possible, they would never bring their strength to bear." Rommel nods. And it was true, then. He lifts the binoculars again, scanning the endless convoy. "If we were to attack this convoy with everything we have left, if we threw the last Panzers, the last 88s, the last Stukas at it, what would happen?" Byerland doesn't hesitate. "We might destroy the head of the convoy, cause confusion, delay them by a day, 2 if we are lucky. And then?" Byerland's answer is quiet. "Then the rest would arrive, and we would be gone." Rommel lets the glasses drop to his chest, hanging from their strap. For a moment he simply listens. The sound of Allied movement is like surf, continuous, layered, impossible to count in individual waves. Somewhere, faint but distinct, he hears the whine of an aircraft engine changing pitch. A British fighter turns lazily above the convoy, then banks away, unconcerned. There is no urgency in its movement. Why should there be? The enemy is not racing to catch a retreating, collapsing foe. He is following at a pace dictated not by fear, but by schedule. Rommel feels a strange sensation in his chest. Not fear, not quite. A cold, clinical understanding. "This is what they never understood in Berlin," he says softly. "You cannot fight the world, not with will, not with slogans, not with a handful of panzers and a few brave men." He looks at his hands, gloved, steady, the same hands that drew arrows across so many maps. "How many times did I tell them we need more trucks, more fuel, fewer orders about standing fast, and more ships that actually arrive in port?" Byerland does not reply. There is nothing to say. A British staff car glides by far below, its paint still glossy. On its front bumper is a small metal plate, 8th Army HQ. Inside, silhouettes lean over maps. For them, this day will be a line on a chart, an arrow extended, a position marker moved west. For Rommel, it is something else. He turns.
The staff car rocks gently as it rolls away from the ridge, its tires crunching over stones and the dried ruts of countless wheels. Inside, the air is close. Diesel fumes, dust, and the faint metallic tang of sweat soaked into upholstery. The world outside flashes by in jolts of color. The pale sky, the tan of the desert, the dark shapes of trucks and guns and men. Rommel sits in the rear, hat on his knees, gloved hands clasped together. The binoculars rest beside him, lenses still faintly fogged from his breath. For a long time he doesn't speak. Bayerlein sits opposite, the folded scrap of paper in his hand like a tiny explosive. The words on it are simple, no flourishes, no rhetoric. To continue the struggle in North Africa is no longer possible without catastrophic loss of men and material. Given the enemy's overwhelming material superiority, the desert war here is, in effect, already lost. One sentence, enough to shake the foundations of how Berlin sees this theater. The driver downshifts to avoid a pothole, and the car lurches. A shaft of light cuts across Rommel's face, carving deep lines from the corners of his eyes. "You hesitate," Rommel says quietly, without looking up. Bayerlein blinks. "Herr Feldmarschall, this is blunt, more blunt than anything we've ever sent. You are not just requesting reinforcements or fuel. You are telling them that the campaign itself is lost." Rommel lifts his head. "Not lost because we are incompetent," he says. "Not lost because the troops lack courage. Lost because the enemy can fill the desert with machines faster than we can destroy them. Lost because ships sink before they reach us. Lost because the arithmetic no longer adds up." He leans forward slightly, eyes fixed on Bayerlein. "You saw it yourself. You counted the guns, the tankers, the repair units.
Did you see any sign that they are near the end of their strength? Bayerlein swallows. No, Herr Feldmarschall. If anything, they are just beginning. Rommel nods once. For 2 years we have played the magician in this theater. We made divisions appear larger than they were. We struck where we were weakest, and the enemy thought we were strong. We lived on captured petrol and improvised depots, and every time Berlin crowed about the genius of maneuver. He gives a short, bitter exhale that is almost, but not quite, a laugh. Maneuver cannot refill empty fuel tanks, Fritz. The car passes a line of their own trucks, pulled just off the road. Drivers glance up as they recognize the staff car's pennant. Some raise their hands. One, a gaunt sergeant with dust caked into the lines around his mouth, gives a quick, almost shy salute. Rommel's gaze softens for a heartbeat. These men will fight wherever I tell them to. They will stand in the sand and fire their last rounds against overwhelming odds if I order it, and they will die well. He turns back to Bayerlein, his eyes hardening. But to ask that of them now, to throw them against what we saw this morning and call it necessary sacrifice, that is not leadership. That is vanity in uniform. The word hangs in the cramped air. Vanity. It is not aimed at his men, not at himself, not at this car. It's aimed at Berlin, at the man who sends messages demanding no retreat while never walked a step in this dust. Bayerlein refolds the note carefully, as if buying himself a few more seconds. Herr Feldmarschall, if we send this, Hitler may see it as defeatism, as a personal affront. He has fired men for less. Some have vanished. Rommel looks out the window where a column of Italian bersaglieri marches past, plumes drooping from their helmets, rifles slung wearily. One of them coughs into a handkerchief already stained dark. How many of those men will vanish if we do as he demands and stand fast? He doesn't wait for an answer. We are officers, Fritz, but before that we are responsible for lives. I was not given command here to be a courier for fantasies. I was sent to win, or, failing that, to salvage what can be salvaged. He turns back, his eyes sharp again. And that starts by telling the truth. The car bumps over a rut. Outside, the desert stretches flat and pitiless. Bayerlein studies his commander. He has seen Rommel in many moods, elated after a successful encirclement, furious at a failed air support mission, calm and razor-focused in the middle of an artillery barrage. But this is different. This is Rommel not as the dashing desert fox of Allied newspapers, but as a professional soldier staring down the full, impersonal machinery of a modern war and deciding where his duty truly lies. You understand, Bayerlein says slowly, choosing each word, that this sentence, once transmitted, will be read not just by the operations staff at OKW. It will land, eventually, on the Führer's desk, and he will see not an objective analysis, but a refusal to believe in his will. Rommel's reply is almost a whisper. Then he will have to choose whether he prefers his will or his army. Silence fills the car for a long moment, broken only by the grind of gears and a distant murmur of passing convoys. Finally, Bayerlein nods, the decision solidifying inside him. Very well, Herr Feldmarschall, I will have this encoded and ready for transmission at the next radio halt. He tucks the scrap of paper into his map case as if it weighs far more than its size suggests. Rommel leans back, eyes half closed, thinking ahead. He knows how messages are received in Berlin. He has been there, seen the great map rooms, the anonymous officers sliding colored blocks around tables, the way reality shrinks when it is reduced to lines and symbols. He can already hear the voices. The desert fox has lost his nerve. He exaggerates, always asking for more fuel, more trucks. A man of talent, perhaps, but not of iron resolve. He breathes out slowly. Let them say what they like, he says, more to himself than to Bayerlein. History will not record how many flattering reports I sent. It will record what happened to the men under my command. The staff car pulls into a low depression where a cluster of command vehicles and radio trucks huddle like animals in the meager shelter of a dune. Antenna masts prick the sky, guy wires humming softly in the breeze. As Rommel steps out, the dry wind slaps dust into his face. A radio operator in a field cap snaps to attention, almost knocking his headphones askew. "Herr Feldmarschall, the long-range set is warmed up. We can transmit at your order." Rommel nods curtly. "In 10 minutes, General Bayerlein will bring you the traffic." The operator salutes and disappears into the back of the radio truck, where glowing tubes and dials illuminate the cramped interior with a sickly yellow light. Bayerlein lingers by the car, his hand resting briefly on the doorframe. "Herr Feldmarschall," he says quietly, "when Berlin reads this, they may not just refuse our request to withdraw, they may order someone else to take your place, someone who will obey without question." Rommel straightens, the desert wind tugging at his coat. "If that is their choice," he says, "then at least they will do so knowing what they are choosing. They will not be able to say later that no one warned them." He starts towards his field table, a canvas map spread over ammo crates, paperweights made of shell casings holding the corners down. The desert sun beats on the back of his neck. Behind him, Bayerlein turns towards the radio truck, the fateful scrap of paper burning like a coal in his pocket. As he walks, another thought steals into his mind. It is not about fuel or tanks or the Allied convoys that seem to have no end. It is about the man in Berlin who will read these words. Hitler has built his power on a single proposition, that his will bends reality, that refusal to admit defeat creates victory where none should be possible. What happens when one of his most celebrated field marshals tells him in plain German that will has met something it cannot break? That the Desert War, this proud, glamorous, myth-laden campaign, is already finished in all but name. Inside the radio truck, the operator adjusts his headphones as Bayerlein enters. The air smells of hot dust and ozone. "General?" the operator asks, pencil poised above his log. Bayerlein draws the scrap of paper out at last and smooths it on the tiny table, the sentence staring up at him like a verdict. He opens his codebook. "Prepare a priority signal to OKW addressed for the attention of the Führer's headquarters," he says. His voice is steady now. "Content to follow. Mark, from Rommel, personal responsibility." The pencil hesitates at the word personal. The operator glances up, eyes flicking from Bayerlein's face to the paper and back. "Jawohl, Herr General." Outside, the engines of the retreating army rumble and cough. Somewhere to the east, artillery beats faintly against the horizon like a tired drum. In a few minutes, those words will be wrapped in numbers and ciphers, flung into the ether, caught by distant antennas hundreds of miles away. They will be decoded in a windowless room, passed up through ranks of officers, carried on a tray through a guarded corridor, and finally laid on a desk in a Bavarian headquarters far from the sand and the heat and the smell of hot metal. And there, one man will read them. When he does, he will not just be reading a situation report. He will be reading Rommel's judgment on the entire African adventure. A judgment that says, "We are done here, whether you admit it or not." But how will Hitler answer? With cold acceptance? With rage? With new orders that defy reality even more violently than before? As the operator begins to type out the first encoded groups, each click a tiny hammer blow against the myth of
The reply does not come quickly. For 2 days, the Afrika Korps retreats westward in a slow, grinding dance of exhaustion. Dust hangs over the columns like a curse. Engines overheat, tires burst. Men fall asleep sitting upright, rifles across their knees, heads nodding with each jolt of the truck. Rommel checks for the answer every few hours. Each time he enters the radio truck, the operator glances up with the same mix of hope and tension. "Any long-range priority from Berlin? Marked Führer Hauptquartier?" "Negative, Herr Feldmarschall. Routine traffic only." Each time, Rommel nods once and leaves, the silence from Germany settling on his shoulders like an invisible weight. Silence is an answer in itself. On the third evening, as the sun sinks behind a bank of low clouds and the desert cools from furnace to oven, the waiting ends. The radio operator's hand shoots up, fingers pressed to his earpiece. A staccato burst of sound crackles through the headphones. He scribbles groups of numbers at speed, pencil scratching furiously across the pad. "General Bayerlein," he shouts, voice cracking. "High priority, from Führer Hauptquartier, for Rommel, personal." Within minutes, Bayerlein and Rommel are both in the truck, shoulders hunched against the cramped walls, shadows thrown sharp by the glow of the set. The operator finishes the last line, then sits back, pale with the effort. Sweat gleams at his temples. "Decoded version, Herr Feldmarschall," says Bayerlein, unfolding the flimsy. He reads aloud. "To Field Marshal Rommel, Africa. Your report has been received. Your assessment of the situation is not shared here. The fighting spirit of German and Italian troops in Africa is well known and unbroken. Talk of the war being already lost in this theater is premature and unjustified." Rommel's jaw works once. "Go on," he says quietly. Bayerlein's eyes move down the page. "The Afrika Front retains great political and military importance. Its holding ties down significant enemy forces and protects the southern flank of Europe. Therefore, withdrawal on the scale you imply is neither necessary nor acceptable." Rommel closes his eyes for a moment, listening. He can almost hear the dictation behind these words, the sharp, clipped phrases, the absolute certainty. "Continue," he says. "You are ordered to halt further retreat at the earliest possible moment and establish a strong, defensible line. All available means will be provided to stabilize the front. You will hold this line to the last man and last cartridge. The eyes of the Führer and the German people are upon you." A beat. There is a final paragraph. Bayerlein hesitates, then reads it anyway. "It is expected that a field marshal of the Reich will find ways, not reasons. Your past successes show what can be achieved through will and resolution. You will once again prove yourself equal to the task. Signed, Adolf Hitler." The words linger in the cramped space, souring the air. For a moment, no one speaks. The only sound is the soft tick of the radio's cooling valves. Rommel reaches out, takes the flimsy, and reads it again in silence. "Find ways, not reasons." The phrase burns. He has spent 2 years finding ways. Ways to make fuel last longer. Ways to squeeze one more march out of blown engines. Ways to outflank, outguess, outmaneuver. Now, when he finally dares to present the hard arithmetic, Berlin calls it reasons. He folds the message once, very carefully. "Fritz," he says at last, his voice flat. "You will draft the reply." Bayerlein looks at him sharply. "Shall I restate our position more strongly?" Rommel shakes his head. "No, we have shown them the sums. They choose to believe in something else." He taps the folded paper with one finger. "Very well, then our duty shifts." "Shifts?" Bayerlein repeats. Rommel looks at him directly. "From winning this campaign to saving as many of these men as possible from being buried in this sand for nothing." He steps out of the truck, the desert night greeting him with a gust of cold air. Overhead, flares blossom briefly in the eastern sky, British artillery marking new ranging points. The distant rumble of guns drifts across the darkness like distant thunder. Bayerlein follows him out. "Herr Feldmarschall," he says carefully, "Berlin has given a direct order. Halt the retreat, stand and hold. If we continue to pull back, even step by step, we will be in open defiance." Rommel gazes east, where the glow of distant fires stains the horizon. "We will do what we can. We will dig where the ground allows. We will organize rear guards. We will fight hard for every defensible position." He turns to Bayerlein, his eyes like flint. "But I will not immolate this army for the sake of a sentence in a communique." He gestures towards the dark bulk of parked vehicles, the faint shapes of men huddled in blankets. "I will not tell those men that their lives are an acceptable price for someone else's myth of no step back." Bayerlein absorbs this, then nods, slowly. "Then we will comply on paper," he says, testing the words, "and interpret in the field." Rommel gives a thin, tired smile. "Exactly. Our reports will say staunch resistance, orderly retreat under pressure. They wish for phrases, we will give them phrases. Out here, reality will dictate." Far off, a flare gun pops, a brief arc of green light over one of our rear guard positions, a signal to move, to yield another slice of sand. Rommel watches it fall. Berlin has answered his admission of defeat with an assertion of will. But will does not move trucks. Tomorrow and the day after that, and the day after that again, he will continue to trade space for time, men's courage for kilometers, hoping there is still some line, somewhere, that can be held without annihilation. Yet the sentence he sent and the answer he received have changed something fundamental. The myth of the desert fox, the commander who always finds a way, now runs headlong into the limits of a nation that will not face the truth. From here on, every order he gives will carry a double weight: to fight the British in front of him, and to shield his army, as best he can, from the fantasies of the man behind him.
By dawn, the halt line exists. On paper. Rommel's field map is spread across the hood of a command car, corners pinned with spent shell casings and a dented water bottle. A dozen pencil marks and hurried annotations crisscross the coast road, the inland tracks, the wadis that cut the desert like scars. Around him, his staff forms a tired circle: bear line, division commanders, artillery officers, liaison men with the Italians. Their eyes are ringed with fatigue. Dust has settled permanently into the seams of their uniforms. Rommel taps the map with the blunt end of his pencil. "Here," he says, drawing a short line just west of a narrow defile, "and here, and here. These are the positions we will call defensive lines in our reports." A Panzer regiment commander frowns. "Herr Feldmarschall, they are thin. A battalion here, a few guns there. The British will punch through in hours." Rommel nods. "Yes, but that is not their purpose." He looks up, making sure each man is listening. "These lines are not walls," he says. "They are breaks, points at which we can bleed the enemy's momentum, force him to deploy, cost him time and fuel. Then we slip away again before his full weight comes to bear." An artillery officer clears his throat. "And the order from Berlin to hold to the last cartridge, Herr Feldmarschall?" Rommel's gaze is steady. "You will hold," he says, "until your position risks being enveloped. Then you will withdraw in accordance with fallback instructions." He takes a fresh pencil and draws faint, almost ghostly arrows angling back from each defensive line to new positions farther west. "These arrows," he says, "do not exist on the version of this map that goes to Berlin. On that one, every position is heroic, every stand to the last man. On this one," he taps the dust-streaked paper, "we fight a different battle." Bayerlein speaks up, voice low. "A battle for time, for preservation." Rommel allows himself a brief nod. "Exactly. We will give Hitler his phrases: bitter resistance, heavy enemy losses, orderly repositioning after exhausting all possibilities. Let them paint their picture. Meanwhile, we will keep an army alive." One of the Italian officers, Colonel Venturi, thin-faced and earnest, steps forward, cap under his arm. Herr Feldmarschall, he asks cautiously, this elastic defense, will it apply equally to our Italian formations? Rommel meets his eye without hesitation. Colonel, I will not leave your men to be sacrificed in fixed positions while mine maneuver, he says. If a sector cannot be held without ruin, nobody will be ordered to die there for the sake of style. Venturi's shoulders drop a fraction, some inner tension easing. Grazie, Feldmarshallo, he murmurs. Rommel returns to the map. We must be clear, he says. The British and Americans believe they are pursuing a broken foe. Let them believe it. We will make them pay for fuel, time, and casualties for every kilometer they gain, but we will not fight their war on their terms. Dense walls of steel against thin air. We will be that air. A young signals officer, barely past his 20s, raises a hesitant hand. Herr Feldmarschall, how do we tell the men? How do we explain that we are both holding and retreating? Rommel's answer is immediate. We tell them the truth they can use. We tell them that our task is to trade ground for survival, so that when a real defensive line is possible, when logistics allow, there is still an army left to stand on it. He pauses, then adds more quietly, and we tell them that I will not ask of them what I would not ask of myself. For a brief moment, the circle is silent. Outside the cluster of vehicles, the retreat goes on. Trucks bump past loaded with infantry, faces blay with dust, helmets askew. A limping half-track drags a damaged pack gun, its barrel wrapped in canvas like a broken limb. A medic's truck rattles by, a painted red cross dulled by sand. Rommel straightens. You all know what Berlin wants. Glorious last stands, dramatic orders, pictures for the newsreels. They imagine a Thermopylae in every wadi. He jerks his chin toward the west. I want something else. I want these men alive in 3 months. I want them to be more than a paragraph in a communique. He places the pencil on the map with deliberate care. Your orders are as follows. You will prepare positions as strongly as supply and terrain allow. You will fight hard. You will make the enemy pay, but you will not allow your units to be encircled and destroyed merely to satisfy a phrase, to the last man. The last man is not a strategy, it is an obituary. A few of the older officers exchange a glance. They understand the line he has just drawn, not on the map, but between obedience and responsibility. Bearline clears his throat. I will draft a situation report for tonight, phrase it appropriately. Rommel gives him a brief, humorless smile. Appropriately is the right word, Fritz, somewhere between truth and what Berlin can tolerate without sending another thunderbolt of orders. He folds the map slowly, the lines of retreat vanishing into creases. As the officers disperse to their units, Rommel lingers by the hood of the car, the folded map under his hand. His admission to Berlin that the Desert War is already lost has been answered with an order to deny that reality. So he has drawn his own line. He will obey enough to avoid open rebellion, but not enough to waste an army for a fantasy. In the distance, the low rumble of the Allied advance grows a little louder, like weather closing in. Rommel lifts his head, listening. Very well, he murmurs to the empty air. Come then, let us see how much life can be pulled from a lost campaign.
The wadi looked like nothing. From a distance, it was just a faint crease in the desert, an almost invisible line where the sand dipped and then rose again toward a low, stony ridge. To a hurried staff officer glancing at a map in Cairo, it would be a nameless contour line. To a British tanker in a turret miles away, it would be just another shimmer in the heat. To Rommel, it was 24 hours of life for his army. He stands on the crest of the far bank, boots grinding pebbles, field glasses pressed to his eyes. The sun has climbed to mid-morning, and already the heat presses down like a physical hand. Below, the defensive line takes shape. If Berlin could see it, they would not be impressed. 2 understrength companies of infantry scraped into the near lip of the wadi, spaced out along 300 meters. A handful of machine gun nests, their arcs of fire carefully overlapping. 4 PaK-40 anti-tank guns dug in, hauled down behind slight rises, muzzles pointed toward the east. 1 battery of 10.5-centimeter howitzers hidden behind the ridge, their crews sweating as they manhandle shells into position. And that is all. No deep reserves, no concrete, no grand fortifications. A break, not a wall. Beside Rommel, the artillery commander, Major Kretschmer, wipes dust from his mapboard. "We have 84 high-explosive rounds and 46 armor-piercing for the guns here, Herr Feldmarschall," he reports. "After that, nothing until the next depot." Rommel lowers the glasses. "Then those 84 and 46 must be made to seem like 800 and 460, he says. "Your first salvos must give the impression of more guns than we have. Fire in rapid succession, change positions between shoots if possible. Make them think they are feeling along a stronger line." Kretschmer nods, already mentally rearranging his fire missions. Rommel turns his gaze east. The first British reconnaissance elements are just visible now, tiny dots moving along the road, pausing, starting again. Behind them, farther back in the haze, larger shapes loom. Tanks, trucks, the endless tail of the Allied advance. Bayerlin approaches, a sheaf of signals in his hand. "Herr Feldmarschall, our rearguard elements from last night are almost through," he says. "By noon, this position will be the only formed line between the enemy and the next 50 kilometers." Rommel glances at the horizon again, then at his watch. "Then we will give them the illusion of solidity," he says softly, "long enough to tangle their feet." He calls down to a nearby infantry officer. "Lieutenant, your men stay hidden until the first enemy armor is within 500 meters. No premature fire, no wasted shots. When you open up, you do so like a scythe, clean, fast, and then down again." The young officer swallows, nods. "Jawohl, Herr Feldmarschall." Rommel claps him once on the shoulder. "Remember, your task is not to die here. Your task is to convince the enemy that dying here would be costly." He moves along the line, exchanging brief words with gun crews, checking fields of fire, noting where the wadi bends just enough to give enfilading shots. Everywhere he goes, the same mixture of fatigue and grim resolve looks back at him. They know the retreat is on. They can sense the long slide westward. But here, today, they will stand. Not to fulfill a phrase from Berlin, but to buy time for the comrades still strung out along a road behind them. By late morning, the first real test comes. An British armored car crests a low rise, pauses, scanning. It inches forward, then back, feeling the ground like a cautious animal at a waterhole. Rommel watches through his glasses. "Not yet," he murmurs. 2 more armored cars join the first. Then behind them, the distinctive silhouettes of Crusader and Sherman appear, hulls shimmering in the heat. The armored cars edge closer to the wadi's near lip. A British officer, half standing in his turret, points with his field glasses toward the depression, perhaps suspecting an ambush. Rommel can almost see the calculation in the man's posture. "It's just another dry gully. We've flushed these before." He raises his hand. "Now." The wadi erupts. Machine guns chatter in sudden unison, a stitched line of dust jumping across the ground where British infantry had begun to dismount. The PaK-40s crack, each report a flat, heavy hammer blow against the air. The lead Crusader takes the first hit square in the glasses plate.
Its momentum carries it a few more meters before black smoke jets from hatches. A Sherman tries to pivot, its turret already swinging, and catches a second shot that shears its track clean off. Artillery shells scream in from the rear, walking along the line of British vehicles that had bunched too close on the road, complacent after days of pursuit. For 5 minutes, the desert is pure violence. Then, just as rehearsed, the guns fall silent almost as quickly as they began. Dust and smoke roll over the wadi, cries drift on the hot air, orders, confusion, the shouts of men tumbling from burning vehicles. To the British commander, this must feel like the first bite of a much larger set of teeth. He will call for artillery, he will radio back for more tanks, more infantry, more reconnaissance. He will not now simply press forward at speed. He will deploy. He will waste time. Byerlin approaches, a sheaf of signals in his hand. First battery reports 15 rounds expended, 2 Shermans and 1 Crusader confirmed burning, 1 more disabled, enemy infantry taking cover and calling for guns. Rommel nods once. Excellent. Now we begin Phase 2. He points to the map. As soon as their artillery starts ranging in, you shift your guns to alternate positions, fire a few more salvos, then prepare to withdraw by bounds. The infantry will hold until the flanks are probed in earnest, then they fall back under smoke. He looks east again, where British vehicles are already fanning out, making new dust. Let them think they have found a strong point. Let them bring up everything they have. When they are fully deployed, we are no longer here. He can feel the invisible clock ticking. Each minute the British spend untangling this small, stubborn knot in the desert is a minute gained for thousands of his own men inching farther west. This is not victory. It is controlled delay, managed loss. But in a campaign already lost in the grand sense, this is what victory looks like now. Not banners planted, but men saved. Behind him, the first stretcher cases from the wadi are being carried back, dust-coated faces, tight-bitten jaws. Rommel pauses as one passes, a young private with his leg bound in a crude splint. The boy tries to salute, his hand trembling. Rommel returns it crisply. You did your work well. Now we will do ours and not throw that work away. Far to the east, the thunder of British guns begins at last, flinging shells at a line that is already, in Rommel's mind, half vanished into the next position.
By late afternoon, the wadi is behind them. From the air, it would look like a scar, blackened vehicles, pockmarked earth, the gray smudges of shell impacts, a small, ugly knot in the smooth fabric of the desert. To Rommel, it is a tick on an invisible ledger. Time gained, roughly 6 hours. Cost, 23 killed, 41 wounded, 2 pack guns left behind with their breeches destroyed, 1 howitzer abandoned when its tractor finally died for good. He rides in the open turret of a command half-track, goggles streaked with dust, the wind whipping at his scarf. Around him, the retreating column stretches toward the horizon. Trucks, tanks, staff cars, fuel bowsers, ambulances. It is less an army than a moving ecosystem, fragile and overstretched. Bayerlein climbs up beside him, shouting to be heard over the engine. Report from Kretschmer, Herr Feldmarschall. The British committed at least a battalion of armor and significant artillery before realizing the line was thin. They are only now resuming rapid pursuit. Rommel nods, not taking his eyes off the westward road. And our losses? Bayerlein hesitates. Higher than we would like for such a short action. Their air cover was quick to respond once they realized we had a battery in play. Stukas are a rumor now, Spitfires are a fact. Rommel's mouth tightens briefly. Air superiority, the one realm where no amount of desert cunning can balance the scales. And fuel? He asks. Bayerlein consults a crumpled sheet.
Average for the panzers, enough for one strong engagement in one more day's march at best. Many of the Italian trucks are worse off. Some are already running on fumes. Rommel looks back along the column. He can see it now, in harsh clarity, the limits creeping closer, mile by mile, the brakes working, but the pads wearing down. Then our next line must be chosen not only for terrain, but for the shortest possible consumption to reach it. He taps the side of the turret. Signal to all unit commanders, economize every movement, no unnecessary detours, disabled vehicles stripped and abandoned. What can roll, rolls. What cannot becomes spare parts and then desert. Bayerlein nods, climbs back down to relay the orders. The half-track cresps a low ridge. Beyond it, Rommel sees the future of this campaign laid out in miniature. Another wadi, another rise, another stretch of hardpan where a few guns could be hidden, each promising perhaps a few more hours, a day at most. How many such places remain? He mutters. The answer comes not from an officer, but from the horizon. To the north, over the distant glint of the sea, tiny specks move in the sky, Allied aircraft hunting. Farther inland, dust plumes mark the British vanguards, already feeling their way forward again after the shock of the morning's ambush. The desert is big. The Allied reach now feels bigger. By evening, they halt near a shallow depression just off the coastal road. It is not ideal, too open, too obvious, but distance and fuel have made the choice for them. Tents do not go up. There is no time. Men drop where they climb down from vehicles, chewing on dry rations, drinking measured sips of lukewarm water. Medics move like ghosts between clusters of the wounded. In the makeshift command area, a couple of vehicles nose together to form a crude shelter. Rommel and his staff hunch over the map again. Kretschmer traces a finger along a thin blue line. Here, Herr Feldmarschall, a thin riverbed running roughly north-south. The banks are shallow, but there is a slight rise on the western side. Not as good as this morning's wadi, but perhaps half a day of work. Rommel studies the contours. Half a day of digging for half a day of delay, he says. We will take it. He circles the position with his pencil. This will be our next break. After that, he lets the thought dangle. Bayerlein finishes it quietly. After that, the ground becomes less favorable. Fewer natural obstacles, and the enemy's logistics grow shorter, hours longer. Silence settles for a moment. Rommel breaks it first. Then every hour we buy here becomes more precious the farther we go. We are not just slowing their tanks, we are stretching their supply lines. At some point, they too must pause to catch their breath. He straightens, shoulders stiff. Until then, our task remains. Step back, dig in, sting, slip away, over and over, until something, terrain, fuel, orders, forces a final stand. He meets each man's eyes in turn. When that day comes, we will face it, but not before, not for Berlin's comfort, only when there is no more room to maneuver between duty and waste. Outside, a truck backfires sharply. Several officers flinch instinctively, then laugh weakly at themselves. Everyone is stretched thin. Everyone can hear the brakes beginning to squeal. Rommel steps out into the cooling dusk. To the east, a faint orange glow stains the sky where the day's battlefield still smolders. To the west, the first stars prick through the deepening blue, indifferent to the armies crawling below. Between those two horizons, an exhausted commander weighs each kilometer like a coin, spending them carefully, knowing the purse is nearly empty.
The line does not shatter all at once. It frays. From Rommel's perspective, it begins with a delay in a report. He stands near the new defensive line, no wadi this time, just a shallow depression and a stony rise. The guns are sighted, the infantry scraped into thin foxholes, the same fragile illusion of solidity. The timetable is clear in his head. Advanced elements of 90th Light should have reported in position 15 minutes ago. They have not. Bayerlein approaches, headset crooked around his neck, a crease between his brows. "Interference on the net, Herr Feldmarschall," he
he says. Some of the forward Italian units have fallen behind. One fuel convoy was hit by air attack, scattered trucks, no proper rendezvous. Rommel's jaw tightens. How many guns does that leave uncovered? 2 sectors on the southern flank, Bayerlein replies. On the map, it still looks like a line. In reality, it is a comb with missing teeth. Rommel looks south, toward the emptier part of the desert. The British are not fools, he says quietly. They have air reconnaissance. They will feel for the gaps. As if conjured by the thought, the distant growl of engines swells. This time, the enemy does not blunder straight into the center. Dust plumes mark armored columns swinging wide, probing toward the thinly held flank. Major Kretschmer hurries up, voice tight. They are not committing like before, Herr Feldmarschall. They are testing us. Short bursts of artillery, then shifting. They have learned something. Rommel raises his field glasses. Through the haze, he can see it clearly now. Sherman tanks advancing in a loose formation, spaced wider, infantry trucks hanging back, armored cars feeling out the edges. They are hunting a line they no longer fully believe in. Order the southernmost battery to hold fire until they are well within range, Rommel says. When they do open up, they must strike like a hammer, make the flank look stronger than it is. Bayerlein hesitates. That battery is mostly Italian, Herr Feldmarschall. Good men, but shaken. They have been walking more than riding these last days. Rommel lowers his glasses for a moment. Then we will give them clarity, he says. No heroics for their own sake. A precise task with a clear end. He dictates quickly. Message to Colonel Venturi. You will hold your present positions and open fire only when enemy tanks close to 800 meters. You will fire as rapidly as possible for 10 minutes, then withdraw by prearranged route under smoke cover. You are not to be encircled. Repeat, not to be encircled. The signal goes out. Minutes stretch. Then the first Italian guns speak. For a brief, savage interval, the southern flank looks stronger than it is. Shermans jolt as rounds slam into armor, 1, then 2, burning. British vehicles shear off, some turning turrets toward the unexpected fire. Rommel feels a flicker of hope. They've bought it. Then comes the second sound. From the north, a heavier British barrage slams in, accurate, fast, walking along the central positions. Shells fall among Rommel's German infantry, who had been waiting for their cue to spring the same ambush as before. Dust, screams, splintered scrub. They are not fully committing anywhere, Kretschmer shouts over the noise. They are feeling for the softest spot and pounding all of them at once. They have ammunition to burn. Rommel sees the problem resolving in front of him like a tactical equation. Elastic defense works when the attacker is impatient. Today, the attacker is not impatient. A runner stumbles up from the southern flank, blood streaking his face. Herr Feldmarschall, Colonel Venturi reports British armor on his far right, faster than expected. They came around through an old track. Our withdrawal route is under fire. Bayerlein swears under his breath. If they cut Venturi off, then send him this, Rommel snaps. Immediate authorization to withdraw now, not after 10 minutes. Shorten the fight, lengthen the life. He pulls back in small groups, leapfrogging. Any gun that cannot move is to be spiked its breech and be abandoned. He knows what that means. Fewer guns on the line, more weight on what remains. The northern flank begins to buckle next, not from a breakthrough, but from absence. An entire anti-tank platoon simply does not answer. Later, they will learn the trucks were hit by fighter bombers on approach, burned out on a back track, the crews dead beside them. In the moment, all Rommel sees is what is missing. Fields of fire that were meant to cross, now empty. British tanks, feeling less resistance there, push harder. Reports cascade in, overlapping. Enemy armor at 600 meters, requesting smoke for withdrawal.
Southern battery down to last 10 rounds. Air attack on our rear echelons. The line is not pierced in one glorious cinematic thrust. It sags, recoils, tears. Here, a company falls back too early, leaving a neighbor's flank naked. There, a signal fails to reach a gun crew in time, and they fight too long, overrun before they can limber up. An ammunition truck, panicked, bolts the wrong way and brings dust and confusion into a carefully prepared withdrawal route. Rommel watches the map and the horizon and sees the danger he had dreaded from the start. Control slipping, elasticity becoming chaos. Order all units, no individual withdrawals, he says sharply. Pull back by company, by battery, never by isolated squads. We retreat as formed bodies, or we disintegrate. Bayerlein relays, but both men know, under shell fire and dust and fear, neat commands fray on contact with reality. A staff car roars up from the rear, brakes squealing. An officer leaps out with a crumpled dispatch. Herr Feldmarschall, new signal from Army Group. They instruct physicians to be held at all costs. Enemy offensive must be stopped in present sector. No further retreat authorized. Rommel takes the paper without looking at it. He can hear the words in his head without reading them. At all costs. He glances toward the east. Through breaks in the smoke, he can see British tanks beginning to nose around the pulled-back Italian flank, like wolves finding the edge of a herd. He looks west. Behind him lies the road, thick with dust and exhaust, crowded with the rest of his army, still trying to get clear. He folds the dispatch once, crisply, and tucks it into his pocket. Then he turns to Bayerlein. Signal to all formations, he says, voice level. Execute planned withdrawal to Line Kappa immediately. Priority to keeping armored and motorized units intact. Rear guards will delay as long as they can without being cut off. If Berlin wishes to hold the desert itself, they may send divisions made of sand. Bayerlein meets his gaze for a heartbeat, then nods. The order goes out. Some will hear it cleanly and act with drilled precision. Others will receive only fragments through the static and the screaming. In the dust and din, some companies will fall back too soon, others too late. A few will be swallowed entirely by the advancing British armor. For the first time, the retreat begins to look, in places, less like a controlled step back and more like the edge of a rout. On a low rise, Rommel watches a knot of his own vehicles racing west in a ragged clump. Trucks, staff cars, even a motorcycle with sidecar weaving madly. Overhead, Allied fighter bombers swoop, and columns of black smoke stab upward where the slowest are caught. He feels the brakes he has been riding for days fail under his foot. They have held longer than math said they should, but even the best brakes fail if the hill is long enough.
The first thing Rommel does is stop moving. In a battle that is turning into motion in all directions, westward flights, eastward thrusts, circling aircraft, the one still point becomes the field marshal standing on a bare rise beside a battered radio truck. He climbs onto the truck's running board, grabs the rail, and gestures for the operator to hand him the microphone. Static hisses, broken by clipped voices, fragments of panic and procedure. Rommel presses the switch. This is Rommel. All regimental and battalion commanders of Afrika Korps, 90th Light, and attached Italian units, listen carefully. Bayerlein watches him, knowing this is not a tactical instruction now, but something else, a reforging. Rommel's voice cuts through the net, hard and precise. We are executing a planned withdrawal. I repeat, planned withdrawal. There is no route. Any man who abandons his post without orders endangers the comrades behind him and the fatherland itself. He pauses just long enough for the words to sink in. Commanders, your duty now is not to hold lines drawn in Berlin, but to bring your men out as formed units with weapons, discipline, and courage intact. You will form rear guards of your best NCOs, supported by whatever guns you still have. You will delay the enemy with short, sharp actions, then pull back together. No lone trucks, no isolated squads. We move like a clenched fist, not scattered fingers. Across miles of desert, men in dugouts, behind gun shields, in the cabs of trucks hear the familiar voice. The effect is not magic. Fear does not vanish, but some of the wildness in it ebbs. Someone at the edge of breaking hears, "There is a plan." Rommel hands the microphone back. "Keep repeating that message on all nets," he tells the operator, "every 5 minutes until I say otherwise." Then he turns to Bayerlein. "We will make an example," he says, "of order, not of punishment." He points to a shallow ridge a kilometer to the rear, running roughly perpendicular to the coastal road. There, a rally line. Mark it on all maps as Regal Rommel. Any unit falling back from this sector will reform on that line, no farther. We will place our remaining panzers there, not to counterattack, but to show a spine. Bayerlein's eyes flick from the ridge to the chaos simmering around them. If we concentrate the panzers there, our immediate front will thin even more. Yes, Rommel says simply, we trade local strength for an anchor. If everything withdraws at its own pace, we lose the army. If some must work harder to buy time for the rest, then that is command. The orders go out. Tank commanders, already edging west, receive new coordinates. Hold on this line. Hull down if possible, covering the road. Artillery officers are told 2 last salvos, then limber up and move to Regal Rommel. Infantry companies here fall back by platoons only, rally on designated ridge, no one runs through. The battlefield, a moment ago a jumble of individual flights, begins to show faint patterns again. On the southern flank, Colonel Venturi's Italians, battered and dust-coated, see German panzers taking up positions on the ridge behind them. The sight alone steadies them. Retreating into emptiness feels like collapse. Retreating into a new visible line feels like maneuver. Venturi's voice comes over the net, hoarse but controlled. "To all batteries, 10 more rounds, then we go. Column order as rehearsed. No one overtakes the guns. We leave nothing for the English but hot metal and empty holes." On the northern sector, a German company that had started to stream back in a ragged clump is halted by a captain on foot, pistol drawn, not at them, but held up like a conductor's baton. "Into sections, section leaders to me. We are falling back to Regal Rommel in good order, or we are not falling back at all." The captain has no orders from Rommel personally. He has only habit, doctrine, pride. Sometimes that is enough. At the ridge itself, the first panzers arrive, dust-blackened, low on fuel, but engines still willing. Their commanders pick hull-down spots, orient turrets towards the east, and wait. Rommel joins them briefly, climbing onto the turret of a Panzer IV. From here he can see both directions. East, the faint movement of British tanks, still feeling their way forward through the fraying rear guards and the rally line. West, the incoming stream of his own vehicles and infantry, no longer quite a mob. Gaps remain, but most now come in packets, platoons, batteries, fragments of regiments still clinging to their structure. Tell the panzer commanders they are not to seek glory. Their task is to show the enemy that every kilometer gained costs them steel. Short, hard bursts, then back behind the next fold. Bayerlein nods. "And you, Herr Field Marshal?" he asks quietly. "Where will you be when the British reach this line?" Rommel looks east again. "Here," he says. "Where else would I be? If this collapses, it will not be because I was 10 kilometers to the rear reading signals from Berlin." He knows, as he says it, that one determined thrust of British armor could smash this improvised break flat. He is wagering on something less tangible than firepower. On fatigue, British as well as German. On caution in their higher command.
on the psychological effect of seeing again and again that the broken Afrika Korps still has teeth wherever it pauses. Minutes later, the first British tanks test Regal Rommel. They crest a low rise, present silhouettes, but this time they do not find a fleeing mob. They meet the sharp crack of 75mm guns from hull-down panzers, the bark of anti-tank guns that have survived one more move, the controlled chatter of machine guns covering a measured infantry fallback. It is not El Alamein. It is not a grand set-piece battle. It is a pause, a clawing back of seconds and minutes from the edge of chaos. As shells trade across the shallow valley, as dust blooms and fades, the retreat behind the line becomes something Rommel can live with. Not rout, not yet. A battered army, still recognizable as an army, inching west with its commander standing where the line is thinnest, squeezing what life remains from the overheating brakes.
They find the end of the desert's generosity at dawn. Regal Rommel has done its work. Through the night, under the cover of sporadic artillery and the stubborn presence of the panzers on the ridge, most of the corps has slipped further west. Slipped is generous. Many vehicles have to be towed. Some guns roll only because every spare man has a shoulder to a wheel. The wounded fill any space that can hold them. What was once a proud, mobile formation is now a bandaged column limping along a road that feels narrower with every kilometer. By morning, the army has outpaced its last halfway decent piece of terrain. Rommel stands over the map again, this time inside a cramped staff car. The vehicle rocks gently as it idles on the shoulder of the coastal road. Outside, trucks grind past in low gear, exhaust hot and sour. Kretschmer traces a finger along the paper, frustration in the movement. Here was the last significant wadi, we have used it. Here, the ridge we have just left, we used that as well. Between here and the next real defensive feature, he spreads his hand over a long, empty stretch. Flat, low scrub, some shallow undulations, nothing more. Nothing a British tank commander would hesitate to cross, Bayerlein adds quietly. Rommel looks from the map to the window, then back again. On paper and in reality, the story matches. The ground offers no more natural breaks. How far to the next position that deserves a name? Rommel asks. Kretschmer gives the distance. It is not measured in kilometers in his mind, but in fuel, in wear, in casualties. Too far, the map officer says. If we attempt one more strong break before then, we will spend the last of our fuel for only a few hours' gain. The panzers will become fixed obstacles, targets, not weapons. For the first time in days, Rommel does not immediately counter with a new idea. He studies the empty space on the map. In that space, he sees the choices narrowing. Behind them, the army. Ahead of them, nothing the desert has shaped into a shield. Then the desert is finished helping us, he says at last. From here, any stand we make will be by will alone. Bayerlein shifts, uneasy. What do we tell the men, Herr Feldmarschall? He asks. Up to now, every fight had a wadi, a ridge, some feature we could point to and say, here, the English will bleed. If we tell them only, stand in the open and trust in orders. Rommel's gaze hardens. We do not tell them that, he says. We tell them the truth, that this phase has a purpose and that it is almost complete. He leans over the map, pencil hovering. From the British perspective, what do they see? An enemy that refuses to be encircled. An army that, though beaten in pitched battle, always slips away intact enough to form a new front. Their supply lines grow longer. Their tank crews have slept less than ours these last nights. He taps the road ahead. They cannot chase us at full sprint forever. They too will have to pause, regroup, bring up fuel and ammunition. When they do, our task in this phase is finished. We will have traded the impossible order to hold the desert for a livable 9 closer to our own supply. Kretschmer nods slowly. And until they pause, he asks. Until they pause, Rommel says, we fight only to prevent disaster.
We do not hold for heroism. We do not sacrifice battalions to buy an hour that Berlin will waste with an angry cable. He straightens. This is the last order of this kind I will give in Africa. No more at all costs positions. Every rearguard will have a defined limit. When that line of withdrawal is reached, they leave. Whether they are praised or cursed in Berlin is my affair. Bayerlein's expression shifts, a flicker of relief, of loyalty. You will take the responsibility, he says. Rommel nods once. I already have, he replies. Every kilometer of this retreat is a line I have drawn through someone else's slogan. He steps out of the staff car and climbs the slight embankment beside the road. The column stretches east and west, a gray-brown serpent of war machines and men. Dust hangs over it like a low cloud. He raises his field glasses. Far behind, at the limits of vision, thin smudges of dust betray the British advance. Not as close as they could be, not as distant as he would like. They are slowing, just a little. He lowers the glasses and turns to Bayerlein. Send to all units, he says. The worst of the open desert is before us now. There are no good positions until we reach the next prepared line. That means our greatest danger is not British fire, but confusion. Every commander will remember, your duty is to bring your men and your weapons to that next line. Hold if you must, strike if you can, but do not die for sand that we cannot use. He pauses, then adds, and tell them this, the desert fox does not vanish, he changes his ground. Our ground is no longer here, in this bare stretch. It is ahead, where we will stand again not as prey, but as a force behind a line of our own making. The message goes out. Some will take from it only that the desert has turned against them. Others will hear the promise hidden in the admission. This mad, sliding phase has an end. Ahead lies a place with a name and a plan that is not just bleed while falling back. Rommel turns his face west toward that unnamed line. He knows he may not reach it with all the forces he has now, but he also knows something else. History will not measure him by how long he clung to bad ground, but by how much of this army he delivers to the point where the war in Africa will truly be decided.
They reach the line almost by accident. It is not marked by a grand feature of terrain, but by a set of decisions taken far away. Here, engineers have already scraped gun pits. Here, supply depots have been half dug into the earth. Here, surveyors have staked out arcs of fire and rough positions. On the map, it has a name. On the ground, it looks like any other stretch of North African dirt. But to a retreating army, it is the first place in days that is meant to be stood on, not merely passed over. Rommel's car rattles off the coastal road and onto a track leading toward the center of the new position. He steps out into air that smells of fuel, sweat, and freshly turned earth. Engineers work in small knots, shovels biting sand, pickaxes ringing on stones. Italian labor units haul ammunition boxes into shallow pits. A few anti-tank guns already sit in their planned emplacements, their barrels pointed toward the east, not as harried improvisations, but as part of a pattern. Bayerlein joins him, map folder under his arm. This is it, he says simply. He gives the line's formal designation, a name that will mean little to anyone not serving here. It does not look like much. Rommel walks a few steps forward, boots crunching on gravel. It looks like a decision, he replies. Someone decided, here we stop falling. That is more than the desert has given us lately. He climbs a small rise that will later hold a battery command post. From here, he can see the arc of the position beginning to take shape. To the north, anti-tank guns being manhandled into shallow scrapes. To the south, an Italian infantry battalion arriving in rough columns, officers shouting, sergeants dragging stragglers back into line. Behind him, the rumbling arrival of panzers, fanning out to pre-surveyed hull-down points. This, Rommel knows, is not the Afrika Korps of legend. It is thinner, dirtier, more tired. But it is also still here. Kretschmer joins them, binoculars dangling.
Rear elements report they have crossed the last checkpoint, he says. Most of the Corps is now west of this line. A few rear guards are still trading fire, but he hesitates. The British advance is no longer a rush, a measured push with pauses, their own logistics, perhaps. Rommel allows himself a slow breath. The hill flattens, he says quietly. Byerlin glances at him. Herr Feldmarschall? Rommel gestures eastward, toward the invisible British. We have been braking on a downhill slope, Fritz, each stop burning the pads a little more. Now, finally, the gradient eases, not through any miracle of ours, but because the enemy must also breathe. He turns, taking in the forming line again. This is where the retreat ends, he says, more firmly now. Not because a cable from Berlin says so, because beyond this there is no army left to save. Here we draw what strength remains and show the British that they have not chased a ghost, but a force that can still hurt them. Byerlin opens the map. What do we tell the men? He asks. They know we've been pulling back for days. They have heard rumors, Tunisia, evacuations, new fronts. If we say, now we stand, will they believe this is different from all the other last stands so carelessly ordered? Rommel looks at the line taking shape, guns, tanks, men, all finding places that are meant for more than a few hours. We tell them the truth, he says, that this is the first position in many days that is not just a break, but a choice, that here our task is not to buy more retreat, but to stop the enemy long enough that the war in Africa changes shape. He signals for a radio. When the handset is placed in his hand, he speaks not in the clipped jargon of earlier orders, but in the cadence of a man addressing tired soldiers. This is Rommel. To all units now taking up positions on the new line, the long retreat is over. We have given ground because we had to, not because we wished to. Now we stand on a line prepared with your blood and your marches. The British are tired too. Their guns are not infinite. Their courage is not exhaustible. He pauses, then adds, here we fight not to save sand, but to save the army. Every gun that holds, every tank that survives today, is a blow struck for tomorrow. There will be no senseless sacrifices. Your lives are not slogans. They are the only currency left with which we can pay for a future front. Across dugouts and tank holes and sandbagged pits, men listen. Some hear only another speech. Others hear the crucial difference. No at all costs, no promise of miracles. Just a line, a purpose, and an end to the sensation of falling. Rommel lowers the handset. He looks east once more, as if he could already see the British vanguards feeling their way toward this new obstacle. The desert fox, he says quietly to Byerlin, has run out of desert. He taps his chest, not in pride, but in simple acknowledgement of fact. Now we will see if reputation can survive reality.